The air in Ikorodu is never truly still. It vibrates with the war cries of Danfo conductors and the relentless revving of Okada engines. But as the camera zooms past the blue provision kiosks leaning against the narrow roads, the mechanical noise fades, replaced by the sharper, more dangerous sound of a rhythmic whisper. The narrator's voice breaks through the static with a riddle of the streets. They say in the heart of Lagos, a woman's tongue can burn down a family's house while her hands are still wet with the morning's wash. This introduces us to Amina. In a city where everyone is shouting to be heard, Amina doesn't need to shout, she only needs to exhale. Her reputation is so pervasive that the elders whisper that even the shadows of Ikorodu hold their breath when she walks by, fearing she might broadcast their secrets to the lagoon. The introduction concludes by shifting the rhythm from light-hearted chatter to a heavy, cautionary tone. It establishes that in a community where reputation is the only currency people have left, Amina's radio isn't just a source of entertainment. In the face of the coming storm and the fragility of trust, a loose word isn't just social suicide, it's the spark that will turn the neighborhood's war into a literal fight for survival. The blue kiosk sat at a slight tilt, as if leaning in to overhear a conversation it wasn't invited to. Here, beneath the rusted corrugated iron roof, Amina reigned supreme. She didn't just exchange tins of evaporated milk for crumpled naira notes, she dealt in the invisible currency of Ikorodu, information. To Amina, a secret was like a piece of overripe fruit. If you didn't share it quickly, it would only rot and leave a bitter taste in your mouth. Her husband, Bodo, often watched her from his small workbench where he stripped copper wires, his brow furrowed in a permanent mask of concern. He was a man who lived in the world of silent circuits and steady currents, and the high-voltage energy of Amina's tongue frightened him. Monarchy, he would say softly, using her former name to ground her, the wind that carries the seed doesn't care where the weed grows. Amina would only laugh, the sound bright and careless, like glass breaking on pavement. She believed her words made her important, that being the first to know, and the first to tell, wove her into the very fabric of the streets. She didn't realize she was merely pulling at the loose threads, waiting for the moment the whole garment would unravel. The stickiness of a Thursday afternoon brought Kemi to the kiosk. Kemi was a woman of substance, usually adorned in high-wrapped girly and the scent of expensive oils, but today, her shoulders were hunched, her eyes darting like trapped birds. She leaned over the counter, her voice a fragile thread that barely rose above the hum of a passing generator. Amina, I am only telling you this because I know your heart is gold, she lied, or perhaps she just hoped. She spoke of the Olorinwaju family, Halima and her husband, the pride of the district. Behind their painted gate and their children's crisp school uniforms, a slow rot had set in. Their business was a hollow shell, and the cooperative society was moving to seize their livelihood by Monday. Kemi's hands trembled as she spoke, the weight of the secret finally becoming too much for her to carry alone. Amina nodded vigorously, her eyes widening as she felt the familiar electric tingle of a fresh gist. She placed a hand over her heart, promising that the secret would be buried deeper than the roots of an ancient Iroko tree. But even as the words of reassurance left her lips, her mind was already scanning the horizon for the perfect ear to receive them. If you feel the weight of this trust and want to see where it leads, perhaps you'll find a place with us here, following these stories to their end. The evening air was thick with the smell of roasted meat and the fermented tang of palm wine. Amina found herself near Uncle Toju's beer parlor, a place where men gathered to argue over football and the rising price of fuel. She had intended to go straight home, but the secret was a hot coal beneath her tongue, burning for release. When Mr. Genga teased her about being the radio of Ikorodu, his laughter acted like a key in a lock. I am not a radio, she countered, her voice carrying that peculiar, knowing lilt. I just see the things others are too blind to notice. The men leaned in, sensing the shift in the wind. She didn't mean to tell the whole story. She only meant to hint at it, to feel the brief, intoxicating power of being the person who knew the truth. But one hint bled into another, and soon the Olorinwaju name was being passed around like a common bowl of pepper soup. She watched the light of realization dawn on the men's faces, a mix of shock and a dark, hungry curiosity. She walked away feeling lighter, unaware that she had just dropped a lit match into a field of dry grass. By Friday morning, the secret was no longer Amina's, it belonged to the streets, and the streets were not kind. As the story moved from the fishmongers to the tailors, it mutated, growing teeth and claws. It was no longer a story of financial struggle, it became a tale of grand deception, of hidden debts, and criminal intent. Each teller added their own dash of spice, their own layer of judgment. The apprentice at the tailoring shop told his mother that the Olorinwojos had already fled in the night. The rice seller whispered that their children were being withdrawn from school in disgrace. Amina watched from her kiosk as the atmosphere of Ikorodu curdled. She saw the way people avoided the Olorinwojos shop, the way they pointed and whispered as Halima walked past. The radio had broadcasted a melody of ruin, and now the entire neighborhood was singing the chorus. Amina felt a sudden, cold knot of dread in her stomach. The fire she had started was no longer under her control, it was moving with a mind of its own, leaping from house to house, leaving nothing but ash in its wake. The confrontation didn't happen in the shadows, it happened in the harsh, unforgiving light of midday. Halima Olorinwojo approached the blue kiosk, her walk steady and her face carved from stone. The usual grace she carried was gone, replaced by a terrifying, hollow stillness. Amina tried to summon her usual cheerful greeting, but the words died in her throat. "Why, Amina?" Halima's voice was low, but it cut through the noise of the street like a blade. She didn't wait for an answer. She spoke of her children being mocked at the gates, of her husband's creditors suddenly appearing like vultures, of a lifetime of work dismantled by a single evening's entertainment. Amina reached out a hand, a frantic "I didn't mean to" forming on her lips, but Halima stepped back as if from a leper. "You didn't mean to. You didn't mean to pull the trigger, or you just didn't expect the bullet to hit." In that moment, the weight of a shattered life hung between them, a silence so heavy it felt as if the very air had turned to lead. As we witness the cost of a single careless breath, we are forced to wonder how many of our own words have left scars we never cared to see. If you've ever felt the sting of a betrayal or the weight of a regret, your thoughts are welcome in the space we share below. The aftermath of Halima's visit was a silence far worse than any shouting. It began at the kiosk. Customers who had once spent hours gisting with Amina now walked past without turning their heads. When they did buy, it was done in a clipped, transactional chill. No one shared their news. No one asked for hers. Amina was a ghost in her own neighborhood, a woman who had been excommunicated from the tribe of voices. At home, Bodo's silence was the loudest of all. He didn't scold her, he didn't tell her, "I told you so." He simply walked his wires, his eyes never meeting hers. The blue kiosk, once the center of the world, felt like a cage. Amina realized that her words hadn't made her part of the community, they had made her a predator of it. She sat alone, listening to the hum of the city she no longer belonged to, understanding for the first time that silence wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the presence of a void. She had spent her life filling the air with sound, and now she was drowning in the emptiness she had created. On a night when the heat felt like a physical weight, Amina's mind traveled back to her childhood, to the small village where her grandmother had once sat her by the fire. The old woman's voice, raspy and rhythmic, echoed through the years. "Your mouth is a garden, monarchy. You can plant seeds of corn to feed the hungry, or you can plant thorns that will eventually pierce your own feet." She remembered the proverb her grandmother loved most, "A mouth without wisdom is a head without a home." Amina wept then, the tears hot and bitter. She saw the thorns she had planted, the neighbors she had mocked, the secrets she had sold for the cheap price of attention. She had lived her life believing that to be heard was to be loved, but she had only succeeded in becoming a noise that everyone wanted to turn off. The grandmother's echo wasn't a punishment, it was a mirror. And in that mirror, Amina saw a woman she no longer wanted to be. She resolved to keep her kiosk closed the next day, not out of shame, but out of a desperate need to find the wisdom she had discarded so long ago. The sky didn't darken gradually, it bruised, turning a deep, sickly purple before it finally broke. The rain began as a steady drumbeat and escalated into a roar that drowned out the city's engines. In Ikorodu, the drainage systems were already choked with the debris of 1,000,000 lives, and the water had nowhere to go but up. By midnight, the streets were no longer roads, they were dark, swirling rivers. Amina woke to the sound of water lapping against her door. Outside, the panic was a tangible thing, rising with the tide. She saw the shadows of her neighbors moving through the waist-high water, their voices lost in the storm. The darkness was absolute, save for the flickering of a few stray torches. She saw an elderly woman clinging to a fence, her strength failing. She saw a mother holding a child high above her head, crying out for a direction she couldn't see. The radio had been silent for weeks, but as she watched the chaos, a different kind of sound began to build in her chest, not the sound of a secret, but the sound of a warning. Amina didn't hesitate. She tied her wrapper tight and stepped into the cold, churning water. Her voice, long used to carrying gossip across courtyards, now became a clarion call. "Chief Emeka. Not that way. The bridge is gone," she screamed, her voice cutting through the wind with a clarity she had never known. She navigated the treacherous currents, her intimate knowledge of every alleyway and shortcut, knowledge gained from years of watching, becoming a map of survival. She directed the young to the sturdy heights of the church. She led the search for those trapped in submerged bungalows. When she saw Halima struggling with a heavy trunk near the rising lagoon, Amina didn't look for words of apology, she simply grabbed the other end and pulled. For hours, she was everywhere, her voice a lighthouse in the dark. She used her radio to coordinate, to calm, and to guide. She wasn't talking to be heard anymore, she was talking to save. In the face of the water's fury, the petty secrets of the past were washed away, leaving only the raw, urgent necessity of the present. Before the final dawn breaks over these flooded streets, we must pause to honor the courage it takes to speak when the world is drowning. To those who have stayed with us through the storm, your presence is the strength that allows these stories to be told. When the sun finally rose over Ikorodu, it revealed a landscape of mud and wreckage, but it also revealed a community that was still standing. The people gathered at the church, shivering and exhausted, but alive. As Amina approached, she expected the old silence to return, the cold stares of the previous weeks. Instead, Chief Emeka stood and inclined his head. One by one, the others followed. Halima stepped forward, her eyes no longer stone, but weary and soft. She didn't say that everything was forgotten, some wounds take longer to heal than the receding water, but she reached out and touched Amina's arm. "Untold," she whispered. The name spread through the crowd. It wasn't radio anymore. It was Untold, the one who knows when to speak. Amina returned to her kiosk, which had survived the flood but was filled with silt. She began to clean, not with the frantic energy of the past, but with a quiet, deliberate grace. She realized that her grandmother was right, words were seeds. She had spent the night planting bridges, and today, she would start to grow a home. The radio had finally found its true frequency, and for the first time in her life, Amina Ajibola was content to simply listen to the silence of a town that had finally found its peace.